Hello again, everyone. You made it past Module 2. Hopefully you all are feeling pretty good about your Module 2 project. Up until this point, we've covered each of the various methodologies or approaches to project management very, very briefly. It may not feel like it was very briefly because it was a whole module, but we touched on project management as a whole and as a profession enough for you to hopefully understand that a lot actually goes into this work that we call project management. Now we're going to unwrap that a little bit more and start looking at each methodology individually. Here in Module 3, we're going to look at Agile methodologies specifically. And as we already know, Agile is a project management approach developed as a more flexible and efficient way to get products to market. The word Agile refers to the ability to move quickly and easily. Therefore, an Agile approach enables project teams to adapt faster and easier as compared to other project methodologies. Many of today's projects have more unknowns than a traditional project management methodology can really handle. This uncertainty about projects and deliverables really makes it challenging to document a project's requirements and adapt to changes successfully. So jumping in, we've got a lot of ground to cover today. Frankly, I'm just going to stop saying that at this point. This entire class is going to be a consistent data transfer from my brain to yours that is absolutely jam-packed with knowledge about project management in this industry specifically. So today we're going to discuss definable work versus high uncertainty work. What is the Agile methodology? A little bit of a history of the Agile methodology and the benefits of the Agile project management method. And then we're also going to talk a little bit about when not to use Agile. By the end of Module 3.1, the idea is that you should have an understanding and ability for defining Agile and its methodologies, differentiating definable versus high uncertainty work, explaining Agile principles and the Agile manifesto. You should be able to analyze when to use the Agile methodology and apply Agile workflows in project planning. So before we actually start talking about Agile, let's first talk about different types of work that we have within this visual media and graphics industry that we're all aiming to be a part of. And for the most part, when you stop to think about it, the work we do as creatives, graphic designers, print designers, illustrators, photographers, videographers, VFX artists, UX designers, developers, so on, our work can really be narrowed down into just two distinct categories. Project work ranges from definable work to sort of high uncertainty work, work that is hard to define. On the left, definable work, those projects are characterized by clear procedures that have proved to be successful on similar projects in the past. Think about the production of a car or maybe an electrical appliance that's going down a manufacturing line, or building a home after the design and architecture and engineering has been completed. All of those are examples of definable work. Sure, maybe not in our industry, but those are all very definable. You know how it's going to be executed step by step. The production domain and processes involved are usually well understood, and there are typically very low levels of execution, uncertainty, and risk. So in a lot of our work as designers, particularly production design, that type of work has been very, very definable. And sort of a side note here, a lot of that work is actually getting outsourced to AI. So we want to try to avoid, as much as possible, this definable work. Where our brains are really suited is in the more high uncertainty work. That doesn't mean that everything that is definable work is getting taken over by AI. It just means that those are the tasks that are a little bit easier for AI to take on because it is so definable. However, new design, problem solving, and work that has really never been done before or is obviously exploratory by nature, those require subject matter experts to collaborate and solve problems and really to create a solution. And that is where we get into high uncertainty work. So some examples of people encountering high uncertainty work include people like software systems engineers or product designers or doctors or teachers, lawyers, and really a lot of problem-solving engineers. That is why graphic information technology is housed at the Fulton Schools of Engineering and we are on the Polytechnic campus, is because we are, by design and by nature and by definition, we are problem-solving engineers. Designers are engineers. And as more definable work becomes automated, project teams are starting to undertake more of the high uncertainty work projects that require much more agile approaches to getting the work done. Some of you who are maybe a little bit keenly eyed may have spotted a similarity between this graphic and one that I showed back in lecture 2.2. But in case you didn't notice, here's a refresher. Hopefully this looks a little bit familiar. High uncertainty projects have high rates of change, complexity, and risk, and that makes them by nature a little bit more iterative and incremental. And these characteristics can present problems for more traditional sequential approaches that aim to predict the bulk of the requirements up front and then control the changes through more of like a change request or change management process. On the other end of the spectrum, instead, agile approaches were genuinely created to explore feasibility in much shorter cycles. And this allows teams to adapt a little bit more quickly based on the more incremental evolution and the more incremental feedback of the work as you go through the project. So now we can actually start talking about Agile, where Agile approaches and Agile methods are really just an umbrella term that cover a variety of frameworks and methods. In a visual context, Agile is, again, it's just a blanket term referring to any kind of approach, technique, framework, method, or practice that fulfills the values and principles of the Agile manifesto. This is sort of the part where I'm going to go on a little bit of a history lesson here. Technically speaking, Agile and the Kanban method are both subsets of the Lean methodology, which we're going to look at a little bit in a future module when we talk about process-based methodologies. But Kanban and Agile are considered to be subsets of Lean methodologies because they are named instances of Lean thinking. And they share Lean concepts like a focus on value, small batch sizes, and elimination of waste. So I want you all to jump into a little bit of a discussion here. What is Agile? Is Agile an approach? Is it a method? Is it a practice, a technique, maybe a framework? Here I threw in a vegetarian gyro as an option. Maybe don't choose that one. But take a moment, pause the video, and just think on that for a second. Try to come up with an answer. I'll meet you back here in a moment. All right, so technically, the answer is yes, unless you chose a vegetarian gyro as your answer. That one is wrong. Sorry about that. Had to throw you off somewhere. Any or all of the other terms could apply depending on the situation. In this class, we are primarily going to refer to Agile as an approach or a method, unless one of the other terms is obviously more correct for that scenario. So I just wanted to set the stage there, get us all on the same page. Now, the Agile methodology is an approach to project management that uses 4 values and 12 principles to organize projects that we refer to as the Agile manifesto. Agile focuses on uncovering better ways of designing and developing software by actually doing it and helping others do it. So the Agile manifesto specifically values individuals and interactions over processes and tools, working software over comprehensive documentation, customer collaboration over contract negotiation, responding to change over following a plan. So in other words, while there is value in the items on the right, Agile really values and prioritizes the items on the left quite a bit more. And something to note is Agile is not just for software developers or software engineers. We'll get into that a little bit more, but these principles can be valuable, and I'm sure as you can already tell, they can be valuable in multiple instances outside of software development. Agile also has 12 principles that help drive and prioritize the work that we do in this industry particularly. Now, for some of us, unless you're here strictly to become a software developer, we need to do a little bit of modification to these principles to make them useful to our scenarios. Especially since this class is about the entire visual media industry, not just software developers, although there might be some of you out there. So we're gonna go through, I made a couple of tweaks here, made a couple of revisions, and this is what you're left with. So I'm actually going to take a look at these a little bit deeper. They're my slightly modified versions of the Agile principles, but they're not that far off from the original Agile, the original 12 Agile principles. The first principle of the Agile methodology states that customers should receive project deliverables or iterations across regular intervals throughout the project's lifecycle, rather than just one project delivery at the end. So if you think about a sequential lifecycle, you sort of work through the project in its various steps, and at the very end you have a final product that you're going to hand over to the client. Or if you're working in-house, maybe it's just a final product that goes out into the world. Well, that's fine, but how does that work if you are rolling out multiple stages of a new packaging product? It doesn't make a whole lot of sense if you're a brand new brand and you are trying to see if the product that you created is actually going to work. You can test it a little bit in the market. Maybe you create 2 or 3 variations of a product before you go out and design all 12. The manifesto's authors found that with traditional project management, it was really difficult to accommodate any last minute or sometimes even minimal changes with plenty of notice. It was really difficult to accommodate those kinds of change requests. So the second principle ensures that Agile projects can adapt to any changes, really no matter how late in the game the changes come. And really the idea here is that those changes are going to cause a very minimal delay, if any, sometimes. Agile projects really plan for frequent, very short, often 2-week timelines that allow for a fast turnaround of a workable product. That's really important. They're workable products. Teams will often break Agile projects into one of 4 week-long, maybe 2-week-long sprints or project intervals, each one ending in the delivery of a product. That's really important there. If your product needs more time, then you need to set longer sprints. It doesn't have to be a 2-week sprint. You can have a 1-week sprint if your team is able to move through it a little bit faster. You can have a 2-week, a 4-week. Some teams I've worked on, we've had 8-week sprints. It's a little long. That's not quite the short iteration cycle that you need in an Agile project. So your change requests are going to take a little bit longer to adapt to. But the very important part there is that at the end of each cycle in an Agile project, you have something to deliver, whether it's a work in progress or a final product. You really want it to be a workable product, whether it's something that you can give feedback on or something that can actually go out into the world. Doesn't really matter, but focus on something that is workable. This Agile principle states that regular communication with all stakeholders is critical to the project's success. Commonly, this involves a short daily meeting with both the project team and any other key stakeholders. Oftentimes we call those meetings stand-ups, and I have a little bit of a saying here is that when you're in a stand-up meeting, you should stand up if you are able to do so. And the important reason that you do that is that if you are standing, you are more likely to go quickly. Your stand-ups should be short. They're not meant to be problem-solving meetings. It is just a status update. That's it. Where are you at? Where are you going? How can I help you clear any blockers? Those are sort of the good questions to ask in a status meeting. A central concept of the Agile project management methodology is that the right people need to be placed in the right positions and given the autonomy that is required to do their jobs well. It is essential to design a project team based on capabilities rather than job positions or titles. The project manager's focus should really be on motivating the project team and supporting them rather than micromanaging them. We all have probably had one of those micromanagers, and it doesn't feel good. It feels actually harder to get the work done versus feeling that you are trusted and that no one's really looking over your shoulder. It's easier to get work done that way. That doesn't mean that there isn't a time and place for micromanagement, but oftentimes in an Agile project, you want those team members to feel that level of trust to get the work done. Now, the Agile manifesto really emphasizes the importance of co-locating teams. And this is maybe a little bit of a more old hat principle, but with Agile, you really want to co-locate teams and stakeholders whenever possible. Face-to-face communication is so much more effective than an email or phone call or even sometimes a Teams or Zoom meeting. If your team cannot be co-located though, in other words, all in one environment, like an office or a meeting room, something to that effect, then video conferencing is an option that can still capture the value of some of those nonverbal cues. And that's really important, is to also see the things that people aren't saying. This is why I think it is so important for cameras to be on while you're meeting with team members so that you can check for understanding, see if other people are sort of responding to the information that you're saying versus writing an email off on the side. The Agile methodology really aims to provide complete working deliverables. I know I've said that already, but this goal should always take priority over any additional requirements, including things like project documentation. Other metrics such as hours spent or time elapsed are genuinely not considered as important as delivering working products. In our industry, particularly for print, maybe less so for like UX designers or even web developers, In our industry specifically, we have a lot of stress on the deadline, but really, if you're working with an agile project, the goal should always be producing a working deliverable, particularly within each of those iteration cycles that we mentioned previously. And that should be over even the deadline. So that it gets a little hard sometimes to balance this one. So just read the room, make sure that your stakeholders are on board for this type of project management methodology, because if the deadline is really, really hard, it is possible that Agile may not be the right approach, and you might need to approach it with more of an extreme project management mindset or something to that effect. But again, anything like hours spent, time elapsed, not considered as important as delivering working products within an Agile project. Now, according to this 8th principle here, Agile projects should have a very consistent pace for each iterative cycle or sprint within a project. Maybe you've heard that term, sprint. We'll get to Scrum in a little bit, but sprints are really a integral part of Scrum projects, which are another subset of Agile. But this breakdown and the breakdown and consistency of the project should really eliminate the need for overtime or crashing schedules, while also promoting frequent output of, again, those workable products. It should also create a repeatable cycle that the team can sort of continuously follow for as long as necessary. If you have 2-week sprints, the team knows that they need to have something delivered, whatever it is that they're working on. They know they need to have it delivered at the end of those 2 weeks. And if you keep that cycle, people become familiar with it and it becomes a cadence. An Agile project's primary focus should be on improving the end product and achieving advancements consistently over time. Now, that's a little bit weird because I definitely mentioned in a previous lecture that a project is not ongoing. Agile projects can sort of change that. Ideally, an Agile project should not be ongoing. It should have very clear deadlines, or maybe not deadlines, but it should have a very clear end result. But you may need iterations in order to get to that end result, as opposed to something like phases or steps that you would set up in a sequential approach. Agile allows for those to be planned as you're going. And each iteration should always improve on the previous iteration, and the team should always be looking to innovate within an Agile project because you have so much flexibility to do so. And then also an Agile project aims to get just enough done to complete the project and meet the requested specifications. There is a term in the visual industry that is called MVP, minimum viable product, where really any additional documentation, any steps or processes or work that simply doesn't add value to the customer or enhance the project outputs should really just be avoided or frankly eliminated if possible. And the reason that we want to do that is because oftentimes with Agile projects, you're working so much faster and so much more iteratively. It's, to use a tech term, it's sort of move fast and break shit as opposed to let's be really meticulous about executing this project. So again, it's very different than a more sequential or traditional workflow. The 11th principle here is that Agile is based on the belief that you need motivated, autonomous, and skilled teams to deliver the best results in products. So this is actually a really great note for all of you, particularly as you're looking for a job. If you are looking for a job that potentially uses Agile-based project management, are you someone who is motivated? Are you someone who is autonomous? Can you make decisions without direction? Can you know where to find things? Are you really highly skilled? Those are things that you want to ask yourself as you're looking for jobs in this industry. Teams and team members within Agile teams should be empowered to organize and structure themselves as required without maybe too much leadership in that. Sure, maybe someone rises through the ranks, but those teams should be very democratic and formidable to their own devices. They should have the freedom to collaborate and innovate as they see fit without being hampered by too much oversight. And again, that kind of goes back to we don't want to micromanage these projects. And then a successful self-motivated team requires a really strong focus on advancing their skills and processes in order to grow and improve. So in Agile projects, the team should have very consistent and regular reviews on their performance and outcomes. You're all going to get a little bit of a taste for this in our final project for the class, but this includes discussions on improving as they move forward as well. Not all of these performance discussions go as an employee might want, where you get a raise and everything's going good. Sometimes you have to hear some hard truths. And those hard truths, if you hear them correctly, are designed to help you improve. Listen to that feedback, because that is what that team is looking for in order for you to grow within that organization or on that team. All right. The Agile method really works in ongoing sprints of project planning and execution, and they enable you to continuously adapt and mature your plan, the scope of the project, and really your design throughout the project. So Agile projects really require an iterative approach which supports incremental, frequent, and very consistent delivery of workable products to the customer or to the client. And this, frankly, innovative approach, when you think about it, ensures that your project team can consistently deliver concrete products without being delayed by changes and evolving requirements as you go through the project. I know I've gotten several clients that would come to me and be like, we didn't really think of this thing when we were writing the project brief. Is there any way that we can squeeze it in? And it's like, I don't want to rework the whole project brief. I don't want to go in and come up with a billing strategy for this one little micro thing. So working with Agile accommodates those within the project plan. Agile requires a very high level of customer involvement, though, and it includes frequent reviews of progress with both the project team and the customer, so that that customer has to be willing to do that type of work and offer those types of reviews in order to make sure that they're actually happy with what they're getting. Now, you can run an Agile project using several different frameworks. Some of them are a little bit more popular, and that's what I've included here. Things like Scrum, Kanban, Extreme Programming, and the Adaptive Project Framework. The rest that you might hear of, and there are plenty more out there than just what I've included here, but the rest for the most part are really just Frankensteins of the four that I mentioned: Scrum, Kanban, Extreme Programming, and APF. So if you see things like XP or FDD or DSDM on here, really all of those are taking 2 or sometimes 3 methodologies, stripping them down, and building them back together again. All right, little bit deeper history. Depending on the source, the origins of the Agile methodology can be traced back to about the 1990s, potentially 1975 or even as early as the 1960s. So it really just depends on the source that you're looking for. However, Everyone agrees that Agile took root with the creation of the Manifesto for Agile Software Development, also known as simply the Agile Manifesto. And the Agile Manifesto was originally released in February of 2001 to create a new way of managing software development. A group of leading software developers wrote the manifesto on a retreat in Utah where they had to meet to discuss some industry problems and potentially come up with some solutions to those problems. This group really understood that the software industry needed a better, quicker way to get products to the market. Their goal was to develop new methods for changing a product and project that would not impact the cost or delay the production schedule of any particular project. They determined that dividing a project into much shorter iterations or more bite-sized tasks would help allow for the faster creation and more frequent testing of the product. Reviews called sprint retrospectives, which are the black diamonds that I've shown on this graph here, would take place at the end of each iteration cycle, which comprised of an iteration sprint and testing. Then those test results would inform changes that could be made without having to wait for the end product to be completed. So you're sort of getting feedback as you work in progress through the project. The Agile Manifesto was initially drafted as a solution for software development management. But the Agile methodology has since grown to encompass projects across various industries and businesses. And as you can imagine, the benefits of a project management tool like Agile are exponential and many. So Agile is particularly beneficial for any project that evolves or does not have a very clear scope and requirements at the start of the project. It's also beneficial for organizations that work in a really rapidly changing environment. Think things like technology, AI, microchips, design in some senses. Think about a magazine design. If you are releasing an issue of magazine every single month, that changes so quickly. But it's also perfect for Agile because you are working within a consistent sprint. Organizations that need to work a little bit more closely with their customers and other external parties throughout the life of the project can really benefit from Agile project management, as well as companies that emphasize process and product improvement and are consistently looking to innovate. That word should be a little ring in the back of your head. ASU is really big about innovation. So Agile project management might be really good for some of the projects that you all are doing here in school at ASU. Agile project management is also good for projects with many interdependent tasks, things that are reliant on something else to be finished before you sort of move forward. And this also is where the team needs to work closely and frequently to communicate and ensure the team's success through that communication. It's also beneficial for companies that need to create a prototype before building the final project outcome. That prototyping nature is reliant on testing, which fits really nicely into the Agile project management workflow. And then it's also beneficial for projects that require rapid feedback from stakeholders about each product iteration before you move on to the next iteration or draft. And I don't know about you, but every single product or project that I've worked on as a designer in this industry has required multiple rounds of feedback and multiple iterations of changes. So a lot of the work that we do really heavily leans on an Agile type methodology. It may not be Scrum, it may not be Kanban, and heck, you might have more of a hybrid approach where you're sort of starting with an agile development in order to figure out the direction that you're going, but then as soon as you're sending it to print, you switch to a more sequential method. So there's options within Agile that allow you to be flexible, and that's what's nice for our industry. All right, so great. We've established when Agile works best. But despite the sort of infinite benefits of Agile, the methodology is not for every project or organization. I want to be very clear about that. But how do you know when not to use the Agile method? What are the advantages and disadvantages of using the Agile methodology? That's what we're going to look at here. Agile is intended to help reduce the cost of change and uncertainty on a project by breaking it down into iterative project management steps. However, if there's already very little uncertainty and a low possibility of change, Agile may not be the most effective approach. For instance, if you work in an industry with lots of regulations or where many of the project requirements are already known, if you don't need iterative planning and multiple drafts, then Agile might not be the right fit. As an example, if you're an e-commerce product photographer, your process rarely needs to change. For this product photographer, they can use largely the same setup, same lighting, same white backdrop with the same camera in the same studio, day in, day out, from client to client, and that's totally fine. Sure, the setting may need to change on the, depending on the angle of the shot, maybe the lights need to be moved depending on the material, size of the object, etc. But by and large, this works with zero additional expectations from the client. Really, the only variable here is when the client wants the images in their inbox. That's it. By definition, a project is a temporary endeavor with a beginning and an end, and it must be used to create a unique product, service, or result. But what if a customer asks you to design and print 9 identical labels for a new packaging project, and you decide to create a separate project and heck, maybe even a separate team for each individual package? In this case, using Agile could result in 9 completely different, totally unique packages rather than 9 identical ones that tell a very cohesive brand story. One of the disadvantages of Agile is that it's not exactly designed for reproducibility. Again, it's designed for innovating. It's the move fast and break shit kind of project management. And then also, an Agile project requires continuous contact with your stakeholders. By nature, some stakeholders may not have the time or the ability or the desire to dedicate themselves in that way to a project. If the project is considered low value or low risk, they may prefer a more traditional sequential approach where you only involve them at some key phases, or perhaps sometimes not even until the end with the final delivery of the product. And then if your company or project team or the organization as a whole really isn't ready to adopt the Agile development cycle, that can introduce risk to your project, and in some cases requires teams to be co-located, or at the very least have sufficient communication tools in place for remote work, which can be a little bit costly, and some companies or organizations may not be prepared to take on that cost, or the teams may not be sort of in tune with that type of communication style just yet. So it might take some training to get there, in which case this may not be a good fit for Agile. All right. That's it for today. Again, I probably don't need to tell you this, but there is a lab that needs to be completed after this lecture, so please be sure to go on and complete that. When we come back for lecture 3.2, we'll be discussing what it looks like to actually work in an Agile environment, so I'll see you back for that.